All right, massive shout out here to Adam Johnson and Ahmed Ali. They did an analysis here, a study that looked into the way mainstream media in the U.S., particularly CNN and MSNBC, the way they cover Gaza versus the way they cover Ukraine. So before I even get into the numbers, I want you to stop for a second and think, hey, what is this going to show? Because if you're relatively educated on these topics, I think you already know. I think you can piece it together. All right, so let's start with this one right here. Mentions by CNN and MSNBC versus casualties in Ukraine and Gaza for the first 100 days. Okay, ready for this? So for each child death, child victim mentions were 0.36 times in Gaza and 16.1 times in Ukraine. So this is what that looks like in chart form right here. So in other words, when a child gets murdered in Gaza, it just gets way less coverage than when a child gets murdered in Ukraine. So this is what we talk about with like media focus, right? And the fact of the matter is, Ukraine is an ally of the U.S., so they are granted all of the humanity in the world, which makes sense. I mean, they were illegally and offensively invaded by Russia and Vladimir Putin, but Israel is an ally of the U.S., and they're the ones doing the invading and the slaughter in Gaza, so Palestinians don't get granted that same level of humanity, right? They don't get granted that same level of humanity. So that's this first one in chart form. We got a lot more to get to. Mentions by CNN and MSNBC versus casualties in Ukraine and Gaza. For each journalist death, reporting hazards were mentioned 2.5 times in Gaza and 24 times in Ukraine. So this is journalist deaths and how many mentions there were. In Ukraine, you had 8 journalists killed, and there were 196 mentions of that. Okay? In Gaza, there were 77 journalists killed and about the same number of mentions. So way more journalists killed by Israel in Gaza, and it's fewer mentions, right? Like if it was proportionate based on the deaths of the journalists, you'd have way more mentions on Gaza, and you don't. Again, what does that show? When it's our ally killing the journalists, shh, don't talk about it as much. And if you bring it up, definitely try to imply it's an accident and they're not doing it on purpose, even though they're definitely doing it on purpose. Let's get to the emotive words. This one to me is absolutely devastating. So the use of emotive words to describe the killings of Palestinians and Israelis in the first 30 days. So the word savage was used 36 times to describe the killing of Israelis and 0 times for the killing of Palestinians. Barbaric was used 102 times for the killing of Israelis and 0 times for the killing of Palestinians. Slaughter was used 181 times for the killing of Israelis and only 6 times for the killing of Palestinians. Brutal was used 332 times for the killing of Israelis and only 13 times for the killing of Palestinians. Massacre was used 402 times for the killing of Israelis and 24 times for the killing of Palestinians. So in other words, you would think, based off the way they cover this, the death toll is reversed. That it's 50,000 Israelis who have been killed and it's 1,000 Palestinians who've been killed. That's what you would think based on the coverage, based on the emotive language that's used. That's not the reality. The reality is the exact opposite. You have a low of 50,000 numbers. That's a very conservative number, 50,000 deaths in Gaza. We've seen numbers from U.S. doctors as high as 118,000. The Lancet says direct and indirect war deaths will be 186,000 or more. So the coverage does not reflect that in any way, shape, or form. And so this is the way you keep people uneducated about the topic. You keep them ignorant about the topic. Now, to be fair, there have been examples recently of these U.S. doctors who were in Gaza doing media tours and explaining what they see, and they say horrific things. They say, I've held a kid's brain in my hand multiple times, and every day we get kids with gunshot wounds directly to the head. They are purposefully killing kids and shooting them in the head on a daily basis. But again, quantitatively doesn't get nearly as much coverage as Israeli victims get. Okay. Coverage of civilian impact of Russia's invasion on Ukraine compared to Israel's Gaza bombing by highly influential agenda-setting shows in the U.S. The discrepancy was evident in primetime coverage on MSNBC. Despite having the highest discrepancy rating amongst the shows, Rachel Maddow didn't mention Palestinians at all on her once-a-week show for 7 of the first 12 weeks of the Gaza siege and bombing. So mentions of Ukraine, the blue line here is mentions of Ukraine and their civilian victims, and there's plenty of it, and there was literally none. And they say here, like, these 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, these numbers here represent different shows. So Rachel Maddow show, Jonathan Capehart, Nicole Wallace, Jonathan Lemire, Alex Witt, and it goes on and on and on. They have Aaron Burnett, Chris Hayes. So, I mean, that's crazy, bro. That's crazy. In fact, for 7 of the first 12 weeks of the Gaza assault, Rachel Maddow didn't mention Palestinians at all on her once-a-week show. This is great work. Shout out to Adam Johnson, and shout out to the other author here, because this is this takes a lot of work and a lot of effort, and this is very, very illuminating. On CNN and MSNBC, the words war crime or genocide were mentioned more than 17 times more in the context of Ukraine than they were in the context of Gaza. Bro. So the word genocide was used 118 times when describing what's happening in Ukraine, and only 7 times for what's happening in Gaza. This is on MSNBC. On CNN, they said genocide for Ukraine 157 times and only 5 times for Gaza. On MSNBC, they used the term war crimes 741 times vis-a-vis Ukraine and 35 times vis-a-vis Gaza. That's on MSNBC. On CNN, it was 774 times they used war crimes for Ukraine and 57 times for Gaza. So guys, again, it's so massively disproportionate and it's so telling. Now, I'm not out here saying like, hey, soften the rhetoric vis-a-vis Ukraine. No, I think it's a very morally clear issue. I think some people like to pretend like it's not morally clear. Some people like to do the whole, oh, poor Putin, poor Russia routine, as if like NATO was on the brink of directly invading Russia and Russia is defending themselves by invading Ukraine. I think that's a dumb and incorrect take, right? It was a war of aggression against Ukraine. So I like the morally clear language. But let's also be serious about the reality of the situation, which is what's happening in Gaza is unlike anything we've seen in modern history, right? I mean, we're not looking at 2 armies that are fighting. We're not looking at that. We're looking at a complete and utter massacre and slaughter and genocide and ethnic cleansing attempt of a civilian population. There's 30,000 or 40,000 Hamas members in Gaza, but there's 2.3 million people in Gaza. And they've shut off the food, the fuel, the water, the electricity to all those people. They bombed power plants and UN buildings and schools and hospitals and roads. And they say, hey, this is a humanitarian zone, go there. Then they bomb the humanitarian zone. Like, it's over 90% civilian death rate. And the way everything's being covered here is not in line with what the reality is, right? It's astonishing. But at the same time, I say that, but it's also not really astonishing because these are U.S. companies and they genuinely reflect the view in Washington. And the view in Washington is Ukraine's our ally, so they are fully humanized in every way, shape, and form. And we'll discuss that situation accurately. But when it comes to Gaza, our ally Israel is doing the massacre. They are doing the genocide. And so Palestinians in Gaza don't get granted full humanity. They just don't. The language is always passive when it comes to Israel, right? Like, it's always passive. It's like, oh, X number of Palestinians, 7 Palestinians died after explosion. And it's like, that's a very weird way of saying Israel bombed and murdered children, right? But this is what it is. This is what they do. So again, massive shout out to them for doing this work. Adam Johnson and Ahmed Ali, really, really good analysis here. And then I also want to give you this while we're on the topic. So the mayor of Nabatea, forgive me if I'm mispronouncing that, in Lebanon, was just killed by Israel. So Dropside News says, breaking, town mayor among 5 killed after Israeli airstrike deliberately targeted meeting of the municipal council that was discussing the city's services and relief situation in Nabatea, southern Lebanon, according to Lebanon's Prime Minister Najib Mikati. Earlier, 15 people were killed in Israeli bombings of homes and a healthcare center in Kana, a southern Lebanese village. Kana village was the site of a notorious Israeli attack in 1996 that killed over 100 civilians sheltering in a UN compound. So, in other words, this was purposeful here. So you had the mayor of a town in South Lebanon was having a meeting with the municipal council, and they were trying to figure out how to assist the people who didn't evacuate, right? Like, how are we going to help these people? Israel knew that meeting was going on and bombed the meeting to kill these government officials who were trying to look out for their constituents. I don't know. That seems like a massacre to me. That seems barbaric to me. That seems savage to me. Are they going to cover it on CNN and MSNBC and mention it 100 times and use this emotive language to discuss it? No, they won't even talk about it. They won't even talk about it. Like it never happened. Imagine the same set of facts. If it happened in Ukraine, they absolutely would be covering it. If you had government officials close to where the fighting's happening, meeting, hey, how are we going to help our constituents? And then Putin killed everybody in this government meeting, we absolutely would hear about it. And it would be, people would correctly be outraged by it. All right, I got one more for you. IDF soldiers attacked military police at gunpoint for arresting comrades over Sadi Tayman abuse. So let me decode that for you because they really, really are softening the reality of this situation. IDF soldiers were attacking military police because the military police were supposed to arrest the IDF soldiers who did anal grape at the concentration camp they have for Palestinians. So you guys remember this? This has been widely reported. There's a lot of grape that goes on at these prisons. They even got the grape on video. They have it on video. We've seen the video. And one of these people died after being graped by an IDF soldier. So the IDF soldier was going to be arrested. And instead of that happening, you had a pro-grape riot. A pro-grape riot. I need you to think about that. I need you to think about this. Does that sound like a country we should keep sending money and weapons to? Is that what that sounds like to you? A country that is protesting for the right to grape their innocent hostages that they're holding in their concentration camps? I didn't think so. But again, you're not going to get good coverage on the media. Again, that analysis is very illuminating. It's like that other analysis that The Intercept did it a while ago that talked about more about the emotive language. And it's like almost never used for Palestinians, used almost all the time for Israelis. This is how the deck is rigged. This is how it's rigged. And this is how people stay uneducated and ignorant on the topic because they're being misled on purpose. Hey, y'all, do me a favor and like and subscribe. It helps out big time in the algorithm. Click the bell as well for notifications when videos drop. And watch that video on screen right now. You know you want to.